So it's time to extend our knowledge one more time. So we're going to go past simple selection statements and into our multi-selection statements. Now, multi-selection statements allow us to create a system where we have 3 or more, or possibly infinite choices available to our user. When is this useful? Well, think of it like this. If you're making a video game, let's go back to old school Super Mario. Even in that game, the user had a ton of input options. They could move left, they could move right, they could run, they could jump, they could duck, they could throw fireballs, they could do all these different things. A lot of different inputs. It's a lot more than 2 options. But your game had to be ready to handle any one of those options or combinations of those options at any given time. For example, you can both run and jump at the same time. So what we want to do is we want to create a system where the user has all those options available to them. So we're going to do this using what we call an if-else-if statement. So an if-else-if statement, if-else-if statement, allows us to set up a system of multiple choices. And it's just, again, an extension on what we already know. We have an if-else statement. All we're going to do is add more choices in between. So if test condition, I'm going to call this test condition 1 because we're going to be testing more than one thing now. Now in between we can have as many of these tests as we want. So just to simplify this, I'm just going to put in a couple, but really remember that we can have infinite choices if we really want. Now the syntax to do the middle options, so we have our first test and then we have all the subsequent tests after that. Those middle tests, the syntax to do that is to use the else if syntax. Else if test condition 2. Now the code that executes here, this is a little bit different. Now pay attention to the comment here. This is code that executes, code to execute if test condition, if test condition 2 is true and all above tests were false. That one point there, all above tests were false, is super important here. So that makes very, very priority-based setup here. So notice the and. So test condition 2 must be true, and all the above tests were false. Likewise, I could have another else if. We're going to shorten down our workload here and just do some copy and pasting. And here we have test condition 3, and this one is going to be, it's going to execute if test condition 3 is true and all the above tests were false. That means both test condition 1 and test condition 2 had to fail. What this does is it sets up a sequence of testing. So as the code comes through, it's going to say, is the first test valid? No? Okay, I'm going to test the next one. Is the next one valid? No? Okay, I'm going to test the next one. Is the next one valid? No? Okay. Oh, and else. Well, that means everything else, which means if all the above ones failed, I'm going to execute this code no matter what. Now it's important to note a few things. Else is optional. You can have an if-else-if statement without an else, just like you can have an if statement without an else as well. So you only have to have the first choice by mandatory. You can add in the optional else-if statements, and you can add in the optional else statement. But everything runs from top to bottom in order. Alright, so it is possible that both test condition 1 and 2 are true. But it's going to get into the first one that's true. So let's say test condition 1 was true as well as test condition 2. But since it comes in and executes the code of test condition 1, it then leaps out, when it's all done, leaps out and goes past all of the remaining if statement and goes on to the rest of the program. To demonstrate this, let's go off into Eclipse and looking at our hour and greeting program that we've been working with the whole time. I'm going to modify this a little bit. I'm going to change this test for hour is less than 10. And now below here I'm going to say, I'm going to change my greeting to good morning. So before 10 a.m. is good morning. And then I'm going to have an else if statement, else if hour is less than 20, which is, what is that, 8 p.m.? So 8 p.m., so anything less than 8 p.m., that is going to change our greeting to good day. And anything above that, so our else clause, so 20 and above, so 8 p.m. and above, that is going to be good evening. So we have a system of 3 setups. I won't forget my semicolon. Now let's watch this as it goes through. I'm going to change hour to, well, we'll leave hour at 6 a.m. That's okay. And I'm going to put my breakpoint on here, and we're going to run our program. Yes, I want to save. Yes, I want to go to the debug view. Now we're going to step through with the F6 key. Sets up hour to 6, sets up greeting to high. Now it starts to do our tests. Is hour less than 10? It's 6. So yeah. So it's going to jump in here. It's going to set the greeting to good morning. And we see that happen there. Now it gets to that closing bracket of the first if statement. Now watch what happens here. It's going to skip the rest of the if statement and go right down to the system.out.println line, because it can only ever execute one of the code blocks at a single run through the if statement. So it's either going to go into the if, the else if, or the else. It can only ever go into one. And then we just continue on with our program, and we get, oh, that's another error altogether because I have to recompile my code. Don't worry about that. But the program itself did finish. We did get good morning exactly as we intended. So if we run this program without the debug mode, it immediately gets good morning. Now let's modify this a little bit. What if I change something? What if I moved these two statements around? Let's say I moved this one first. I'm going to move the else if up here, change the else to the if, and change this one to the else if. Get rid of my empty line here. What should I get for output now? Should I still get the same thing? I certainly intend to get the same thing. It's 6 a.m. I should see good morning by logical standpoint. But is that what I'm actually going to get? Let's run it and find out. We run the code, and yes, I want to save. Now we're getting good day. Huh. Well, that doesn't make any sense logically. But if we trace through the code and step through it one line at a time, let's run it through the debugger again. We set that hour to 6 and we set the greeting to high. Now it does its first test. Is hour less than 20? Oh yeah, it is. So it's going to go in. It's going to set greeting to good day. Not my intention, but that's what it's logically set up to do. And because it only ever gets into one of our statements, one of our blocks, it's going to skip the rest and display the results. So we didn't actually get what we wanted there. What this tells us is that priority matters. We have to be careful as programmers to make sure that we set up our sequential if statements in the proper order. If we don't, we may not get what we expect to get. So it's up to us as programmers to make sure that everything is set up effectively. Now this is an effective statement. So just to reiterate a few things, remember that each if-else-if statement only has one if. It can have as many else-ifs as it wants. The else is optional. It will only ever go into one of the blocks of code, and there can be as many lines of code in each block as we want. An if statement itself is a block of code, which means if I were to document this whole if statement, I would have one comment here that would document the entire if logic. But then inside the if statement, I could have multiple blocks of code inside of here. So I may want to document the code in here. Now, if this is only one line command that's very, very simple, so I wouldn't need to document it. But if it was more complicated, or I had multiple blocks inside this if statement, each block would have to have its own comment. In this case, because it's so simple, that doesn't make a lot of sense to do so. We want to make our code readable, and adding too many comments makes it just as unreadable as having no comments. So that's all we have for our if, else statements. I wanted to leave you with a little bit of thought. Now imagine we created a program. Let me just kind of copy and paste this. Let's go back to Java View for a second. And I'm going to get rid of all the logic that we have in here. Now I'm going to paste this logic in here. Can't really see this. I got to create my variable called number. Int number, and I'm going to assign it the value 2. Now if we look at this code, what do you think we should get as a result? So let's just display the result, system.out.println, and then we're going to output number. Now follow this and trace through the code. We're going to say if the number is, we're going to assign the value of number to 2. If number is less than 0, convert it to a positive number. So multiply it by -1. So any negative times a negative is going to give us a positive. However, if number is greater than 0, we're just going to multiply it by 2. Why? It doesn't really matter. We're just doing a proof of concept here. So our value, 2, will result in a 4 if it were to get into this code. Now let's go through logically. 2 is not less than 0, so it's going to skip this code. Then it goes down and tests the else if statement. Is 2 greater than 0? Yeah, it is. So it's going to come in and it's going to multiply it by 2, and then we're going to see the result. Now if we run this program, we should get a 4. Why did we get an error here? Oh, I still have my break statement in there. Sorry. Let's try running this one more time. And we get our 4 on the screen. Great! That's exactly what we should expect. Now let's put a value of -2 in there. And let's run the program again. So now it's -2, which means it's going to come in. It's going to say, is number less than 0? Sure is. So -2 multiplied by -1 gives us 2. Skips this else if code, and it should display our proper number on the screen, and we get our 2. Okay, this is fantastic. Now what about this? I'm going to comment this code out for 1 second, just so you can still see it, because I don't want it to go away. I'm going to replace it. Instead of using an if-else if statement, I'm going to use 2 if statements. So they basically have the exact same test. So this first one is testing less than 0, the second one is testing greater than 0. The logic inside is exactly the same. The question is, will we get the exact same results? So let's set number back to 2 again. Now the first time we ran this in the other code, we got a 4 as a result. Let's run our program, and we still get our 4. Awesome. Now let's change it to a -2. Now the last time we ran this, we ended up with a +2. Let's run our program again. Oh, we got 4 again. What happened? How did that occur? Shouldn't we have gotten +2? No. Let's take a look. If we look at this, the if logic is testing our current value. So currently number is a -2. And it says, okay, is -2 less than 0? Sure is. Comes in, multiplies it by -1, so now number has the value 2. Comes out, but it stays here and executes this next test. This is not an else if statement, so this is a totally separate if statement that gets just as much priority as this one. They're both going to be tested. But since number now has a value of 2, it's positive. So it's going to go into this if statement as well. So we get number is equal to number times 2, which gives us 4. So we actually get an effective result, two totally different results based on the way we set up our if statement. If else versus if and an if. So again, it tells us that we need to be careful as programmers how we structure our selection statements.